Who here is ready for war?
The Third World War is not only inevitable, but is already taking place.
What begins as a regional war could very rapidly escalate out of control.
The problem with wars is easier to start than to stop them, and it always gets out of hands.
The Ukraine war is accelerating the decline of the West.
Painful trade-offs will be unavoidable.
Iran will be our Syracuse. That will be our end.
I'm Chas Freeman. I was a career diplomat for 30 years serving the United States. I'm now the chair of a global business development company. I had a fantastic career in the Foreign Service. I was involved in the opening to China, every phase of it. And we had no relationship at all with China. We opened a relationship under President Nixon. I was the principal American interpreter on that trip, and I wrote almost half of the briefing papers. I was involved in removing Cuban troops from Angola and securing the independence of Namibia, which ended the colonial era in Africa, and was ambassador to Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War to liberate Kuwait in 1990 to 91. Now, I think the dangers of a broader war than the regional ones that are now in progress are very considerable. We have a war in Europe, which is in danger of spreading, in large measure because our allies in Western Europe, in NATO, have no peace proposal, no vision for peace whatsoever. All their proposals involve continuing the war in Ukraine or escalating it. And the Russians are determined to achieve the objectives they set out with, which are protection for the Russian-speaking minority in Ukraine, the neutralization of Ukraine, no foreign weapons pointed at Russia to be stationed there, and finally a broader discussion of European security architecture that would reassure Russia against a threat from the rest of Europe, and the rest of Europe against the threat from Russia. They will continue until they achieve these objectives. Beginning in 1994, with Boris Yeltsin continuing under his successor, Vladimir Putin, the Russians have repeatedly demanded or sought a negotiation with the West on the issues of the status of the Russian minority. They achieved that with an agreement at Minsk, which the West later repudiated. In December 2021, the Russians demanded negotiations on the three issues that I mentioned: the status of the Russian-speaking minority in Russia, the neutralization of Ukraine, and European security architecture. The Biden administration flatly refused to talk to the Russians, and therefore left the Russians with no alternative but to carry out the ultimatum they had issued. And in February 2022, they invaded Ukraine. Was the position reasonable? Yes, because in international politics, if you are left with no peaceful way of resolving problems which are existentially important to you, you go to war. And that's what they did. The Western Europeans have been fairly pathetic throughout all this. They basically have behaved like vassal states of the United States. They have shown no vision for a broader peace in Europe, or even any willingness to accommodate what are not unreasonable Russian demands, that they not station weapons on the Russian border aimed at Russia. When you start a war, you need to do several things, and the Russians did them all. First, announce what the objectives are, and the objectives should be feasible. And second, determine how you're going to bring the other side to agree with its defeat, if you are able to defeat it. Because wars don't end until the party that has suffered defeat admits that and accommodates the new realities. And you don't move the goalposts. Russians have never changed their objectives at all in 3 years. Other Europeans have been all over the map. moving the goalposts all over the place. And this is the formula for a forever war, which is an American patented invention. A war with no clear objectives, where the goalposts are constantly moved, with no war termination strategy, that therefore just goes on forever. Maximum pressure on North Korea has produced a North Korean nuclear intercontinental missile that can strike any place in the United States. So we have created a menace to ourselves that did not exist. We're working on doing the same with Iran, which just tested an ICBM, which has not made a decision to go nuclear, but which is being put in a position where the only feasible deterrent against Israeli or American attack will be a nuclear arsenal. We are pushing the envelope with China. American military modernization of our nuclear arsenal and a lot of loose talk about using tactical nuclear weapons has forced the Chinese from a minimalist force de frappe, French style, a force that can take a bite out of an opponent, to adopt our philosophy of mutual assured destruction. And so now we face a vastly larger nuclear threat from the Chinese than we ever did. All of the war games that we've run and in our defeat, if we get into a war over Taiwan, many of them end with a nuclear attack by us on China and a response from the Chinese, nuclear attack on the United States. In many scenarios, we lose 2/3 of our Navy and Air Force. The Chinese do the same. But unlike us, they have the industrial base to replenish, to rebuild on a rapid basis. And so we're talking about a war that is fatally stupid if we get into it. Well, we have undergone a technological revolution. There's an African diplomat of some note who once described the impact of technology on diplomacy by saying that the radio had enabled us to hear all evil, television had enabled us to see all evil, and the airplane had enabled us to go and do all evil. And we have added to that a media universe, a mediaverse, if you will, in which we are so immersed that we can't see reality. What we see is what corporate oligopolies want us to see, and what vested interests determine we should see or shouldn't see. So we have lost freedom of the press and freedom of speech in many respects, because now we have oligopolistic or dominant narratives that are politically enforced. I decided that I did not want to have the world presented to me by some corporation with a particular set of viewpoints. I would like to see it directly. I'm very active in looking at alternative media, meaning things like TikTok, which of course has been objected to, not because it's collecting data on Americans. The real reason is that it told the true story of what was happening in Gaza. This was not acceptable to the Zionist lobby, and they have now conspired with President Trump on a scheme to take over the medium, alter the algorithm, so that the truth about genocide in Palestine will not be seen. Israel has bombed, strafed, starved, invaded every one of its neighbors, not just the Palestinians. It's conducting military operations on a wide area basis. It participated in the overthrow of the Syrian regime, and it now dominates Syria. It has tried to do the same thing in Lebanon, where it has been blocked by Hezbollah. It has tried to resist, to counter the resistance of the de facto government of Yemen, Ansar Allah, the Houthis, to the genocide in Gaza, and it has attacked Iran with surprise attacks on 3 occasions. I think it is forcing Iran into a corner. The Iranians expect another Israeli attack, I think they're right to do so. And I think Israel, although it claims it is trying to prevent Iran from doing what it did, namely cheat on the Non-Proliferation Treaty and mislead everyone with a clandestine nuclear program that they denied they had, it is forcing Iran to follow its own example. It is certainly of great concern to the United States, because we keep trying to pivot away from the Middle East, from West Asia, in order to confront our enemy of choice, which is China, and we constantly fail because Israel keeps generating new threats that we have to deal with. Now, this is a very weird relationship between a patron and a client state, where the client state makes all the decisions and imposes them on the patron. It's a case of the flea driving the dog. The flea sucks a lot of blood out of the dog. The flea gives directions to the dog, and the dog moves along. It's not a joke that Capitol Hill is Israeli-occupied territory. It really is. They're not an ally because they have no commitments to us at all. An alliance is a relationship of mutual commitment. It's different from an entente, which is a limited commitment on a contingency basis. Israel has no commitment to us on either basis. It does what it wants, and when we urge it not to do things, it doesn't pay any attention. When we ask it to do things, it also doesn't pay any attention. So this is a very unequal relationship, and it's one from which the benefits flow mostly to Israel, very few to us. I'm very sorry for Israelis. I think many people tried over the years to warn them that they were in danger of becoming a pariah internationally, a rogue state that was loathed rather than loved, and they have succeeded in doing that. And I can't at this point be more concerned about the damage Israel has done to its own moral reputation and standing in the world than I am about the fact that we have been in lockstep with Israel, and our reputational damage is at least as great as Israel's. Now, we just saw in the United Nations General Assembly in 2025 two speeches. One that Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel gave, where the entire hall was empty because everybody had walked out to protest his presence. An accused war criminal with a warrant for arrest on his head, up there speaking a large raft of bold-faced lies. No starvation in Gaza. Israel's been feeding people generously. Hamas baked babies in front of their parents. Hamas raped people. All of these accusations have been proven to be false. He was basically describing the behavior of his own army. In Gaza, people didn't walk out on Donald Trump, our president. They listened silently to him. I don't think they listened to him with respect. While he was speaking, the diplomats who were there were texting saying, "This man is absolutely insane. Can't Americans see that?" And this goes back to the issue of media-enforced narratives which overpower the sense of reality. We traditionally have had a very orderly policy development process, which involves consulting expertise throughout the U.S. government and even beyond it, in order to come up with policies that might deliver benefits to the United States. There is no policy process now. We have the National Security Council, which was supposed to coordinate these policy development efforts, has been stripped of most of that function. Right. Policy is made by Donald Trump on the basis of his instincts and his ignorance. But he's so powerful politically, with a Republican Party that has basically become a cult that will question nothing he says, and a Democratic Party that is feckless and disorganized, that he imposes his will on our government and on the world. What are the results? There's a great deal of misogyny. We have a Department of Defense that has been renamed the Department of War, and is involved in promoting an extreme form of masculinity. Most of the senior female military officers have been dismissed, and we are retreating to an earlier era. He has, in his first term, he assassinated General Soleimani of Iran when Soleimani was in Baghdad to discuss peace. He participated in an Israeli surprise attack on Iran, which was preceded by a diplomatic meeting, the scheduling of a diplomatic meeting to discuss peace with Iran. His government, his administration, was clearly involved, as were the British, in the Ukrainian Operation Spiderweb attacks on deep into Russia, which were, again, under the cover of a diplomatic meeting, a peace meeting in Istanbul. So there's a pattern here. Before you even get to the absolutely illegal murder of people on the high seas off Venezuela on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, simply the assertion that they are smuggling narcotics and have been branded narco-terrorists. So the United States, which sponsored a world order after World War II, which was devoted to the idea of international law, the United Nations Charter, at the apex of the international system, efforts to regulate conflict, to ensure that humanitarian disasters were dealt with, and so on, has retreated from all of this. One of the first acts of the Trump administration was to destroy our capacity to provide foreign assistance, either for development purposes or for disaster relief or for post-war relief to the world. U.S. Agency for International Development was euthanized. The U.S. Institute of Peace was taken over. There's clearly no interest in peace, per se. There is interest in stopping fighting, but that is fueled by the president's megalomaniac desire to gain a Nobel Peace Prize. Principally, I assume, because President Obama was given one for no better reason than that the Norwegians couldn't think of any other way to get him to go to Oslo. So President Trump has actually asked. He's running around saying he stopped 7 wars. Nobody else believes he did that. But he's actually asked the Norwegians, to succumb to his pressure and give him a Nobel Peace Prize. Meantime, people are dying at the hands of Americans. Iran is an ancient civilization, at least 2,500 years old. It is a country with great talent and scientific ability. It was a competitor of the Roman Empire successfully. It is not a country that will soon disappear. And the Israeli and American objective of regime change in Iran has so far been spectacularly unsuccessful. The attacks on Iran, instead of promoting regime change, have unified Iranians behind the idea of Persian identity and independence. I think we will watch the next round of fighting between Iran and Israel with great interest. The last round, the so-called 12-day war, ended with Israel basically running out of the ability to intercept Iranian missiles. The Iranians aimed only at military-related targets. They did not target any civilian institutions. And their missiles proved able to penetrate Israeli defenses and strike accurately. The next round, they will not withhold attacking civilian targets because Israel has done that to them. So this is going to be a very bloody lesson for Israel. It will be unpleasant for Iran. But at the end of it, it's more likely there will be regime change in Israel than in Iran. Israel is a settler society. And the settlers are people who moved there because of a fear of a repetition of the European Holocaust. The Arab Israelis who are there, the Arab Jews who are there, the Mizrahim, moved there because the establishment of Israel made their continued presence in Arab societies untenable. They're all migrants to Israel, or the descendants of migrants. 2 million of them have foreign passports. There's been an enormous exodus from Israel over the last 3 years, and since October 7, 2023. There is the historic example of 2 Christian kingdoms established by the Crusaders, also in Palestine, which didn't last 100 years because they basically lost the support of the superpowers of the time that were keeping them alive in a sea of Muslim and Christian dissenters. Persia, Iran, has not gone away in 2,500 years. Israel is a new creation of European colonialism in the middle of the Arab world, and it could very well disappear. It has been very stupid for the Israelis, because of the enormous power that the United States has enabled them to develop, not to make peace with their neighbors, but they have put forward no peace proposal of their own to any neighbor, nor to the Palestinians. The only peace that they have has been forced on them by the United States. Jimmy Carter forced them at Camp David into the Camp David Accords with Egypt, which Jordan later joined under pressure from Bill Clinton, the president. There is no peace with Lebanon. There is no peace with Syria. There is no peace with Yemen. There is no peace with Iran. And when people try to make peace, go to negotiations with the Israelis, they find that they're very likely to be assassinated. You know, Israel has murdered, or it's tried to murder, all of the people who have sat down with it to discuss peace. It murdered Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, while he was a state guest during the presidential inauguration in Tehran. It murdered Nasrallah and his people in Hezbollah, in Beirut. It has murdered the prime minister of Yemen, and it has murdered people who went to the negotiating table with it among the Palestinians. It has assassinated, by its own count, over 3,000 people since its existence. It is a state that lives by terror. It is a terrorist state that lives off the murder of anyone who opposes it. In the United States, the Zionist lobby does not murder people, but it uses extremely underhanded means to deny them employment, and it has been quite successful in intimidating a large number of Americans. However, Israel has overdone it to such an extent that there is now a broad international agreement that it is evil, that it should not exist in its present form, that its current policies are completely unacceptable, and this sentiment is now becoming the majority sentiment in the West, including the United States, belatedly. I was asked in the Obama administration to become the chair of the National Intelligence Council, which is the coordinating body for intelligence reports and briefs the president daily if the president is interested. Donald Trump is not interested. This is not a Senate-confirmed position, so I did not want to do it. I had spent 30 years serving my country. I was impecunious. I wanted to become secure in my old age. And so I declined twice. The third time I was asked, it was, your country needs you, the president wants you, and so forth. And I succumbed, and I agreed. Very shortly thereafter, there was a leak of my appointment. And because I have been critical of Israel, really in an effort to save Israel from itself, long before it did the horrible things it's been doing more recently, I could see that it was headed in that direction. I was immediately smeared as an anti-Semite because I had a connection with China there was an Israeli organized effort to produce Tibetan dissidents to denounce me, and so forth and so on. A Twitter account had been opened for me in Israel, in which all sorts of utterly inane and stupid anti-Semitic remarks were allegedly posted by me. Twitter, to its credit, when I discovered this, immediately took it down and had the courtesy to inform me where the account had been established. So there is no limit to what the Zionist lobby will do to prevent anyone from being appointed to a position in the U.S. government or serving in a place of influence that might have consequences for Israel that they don't like. There are calls being made for Israel to be suspended from the United Nations, as South Africa was, on the grounds that Israel is an apartheid state. There are calls, of course, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court have both taken action against Israel. There is not a single human rights investigative organization, whether it's private sector, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Israeli institutions, UN institutions, the UN Human Rights Commission, not a single investigative agency, private or public, has disagreed with the charge that there is genocide being committed by Israel. And the irony of this, Israel established, allegedly, as a place to retreat from genocide, to be safe from renewed genocide, turning around and committing genocide, this is ironic, at least. There are some very weird theories, religious theories, about Israel catalyzing the end of days. Not just Jewish traditions, Gog and Magog and so forth, but Christian Zionists who believe that the reconstruction of the temple atop the Temple Mount, or where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now is, and the breeding of a red heifer to be sacrificed at that temple will bring on the end of days, the rapture. All Christians will be taken up to heaven. All Jews will either be annihilated or converted forcibly to Christianity. So here we have the domestic American base of support for Zionism, profoundly anti-Semitic in its objectives, but arguing for Zionism. And this just illustrates the fact that Zionism is a heresy. It is not a Jewish, an expression of the Jewish values that we know in the West. It is no more authentic than ISIS, Daesh, the Islamic State is an expression of ordinary Islam. These are extremist philosophies which are hate-filled, racist, and violent, which dehumanize their enemies and murder them. Israel is very, very much overextended. There have been something like 80,000 bankruptcies of small companies. Israel took pride, justifiably, in its incubation of startup technology companies. They have now moved abroad. When the reserves are called up in Israel, 40 to 50% turnout is considered excellent. When the so-called 12-day war occurred between Israel and Iran, there was a huge exodus of Israelis by any means possible from the country. The hostage families, the families of the hostages that Hamas took on October 7th, have been neglected. Basically, about half of those who died on October 7th appear to have been killed by the Israelis themselves under the Hannibal Directive, which directs the military to murder Israeli civilians rather than allow them to become hostages. So of the figure about 1,200 people dying, probably 600 died at the hands of the Israeli. So this is not a happy scene, and it does not instill confidence in the survivability of the Zionist state. The challenge from Pacific Asia, from China Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so forth, is not military. It is economic and technological. The Chinese economy, in terms of purchasing power, is at least 1/3 larger than ours now, and probably twice as large. Technologically, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which ironically was funded by the US State Department to badmouth China, tracks 64 areas of technology. 20 years ago, we were ahead in most of them. The latest survey shows China's ahead in 57 of 64. South Korea is ahead in 2, and we have whatever the rest are. We're losing. We're not competing. In fact, what we are doing is destroying the very basis of everything that made America great. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, respect for diverse opinion. And what we're seeing now is an exodus of American scientists, some of them of Chinese origin, some not. 3/4 of American scientists now, according to a recent poll, are thinking of leaving the United States because of the atmosphere, which is anti-scientific. Just look at what's happening under RFK Jr. in the health field, which basically is a reminder that the reason the Dark Ages were dark is that the religious authorities banned Greek and Roman science and engineering, mathematics, and so forth, and replaced them with faith-based nonsense. That's happening here. It was not true that, as candidate Donald Trump said, that the world was laughing at us, but the world is now doing so and looking at us askance as we destroy our very power and authority. Wars can be necessary to defend the supreme national interest, which is the national identity and independence and sovereignty. Defensive wars are just. Offensive wars, wars of choice, are very, very questionable. They come about when the party inaugurating the war is denied any peaceful means of addressing its interests or having them addressed. That is exactly what happened in Ukraine. That is the refusal to meet to discuss the interests of the Russians forced them in the end to resort to force. That was entirely avoidable, and it is a tragedy mostly for Ukraine. The Ukrainians have lost more than 1 million men, and they don't have the manpower now to carry on the war. So they're losing. There's no effort really to retreat from Ukraine. Therefore, Ukraine, which has already lost 20% of its territory, is likely to lose a good deal of the rest. Western Ukraine is the home of Stepan Bandera and the Banderists, who killed 150,000 Poles during the run-up to World War II and during it, and 250,000 Jews. Stepan Bandera is now the anointed founding father of modern Ukraine, with statues to him everywhere. The Azov Brigade, which was notorious, declared by the New York Times to be neo-Nazi until the narrative shifted and it became heroically Ukrainian nationalist, is a Banderist organization. Ukraine has problems with countries like Poland because of this history. It has a problem with its Russian minority for the same reason. And the war began with a coup funded and organized by the United States and the British in Kyiv, which overthrew the elected, if corrupt, government that was then in place and replaced it with an unelected, equally corrupt, anti-Russian government, which immediately banned the use of Russian language for official purposes, began burning Russian books, and drove the eastern part of Ukraine, which is majority Russian-speaking, into rebellion. When the war, that was a civil war, went on for 8 years. During that period, NATO armed the Ukrainian armed forces, trained them, and when the Russians invaded in February 2022, they faced a Ukrainian army of 780,000 men, the largest in Europe other than Turkey's. Bigger than the combined armies of Britain, France, and Germany. Trained to NATO standards. And where was that army in February 2022? It was poised on the border of the self-declared independent Russian-speaking people's republics in the eastern part of Ukraine. So the invasion by the Russians was not only a response to the refusal of the West to sit down and talk, it was also a response to a projected invasion of the Russian-speaking areas. When you're considering intervening in a civil war, there are three principles you should bear in mind. One, don't. Second, if you do intervene, pick the side that's going to win. And three, help them win fast. Because war is unbelievably destructive, expensive, and it's always a gamble. You cannot tell how it will come out. The idiocy of George W. Bush standing on an aircraft carrier and announcing mission accomplished when the defeated enemy had not acknowledged defeat, and there was no effort being made to reconcile with Iraq, was stupendous. But it's not untypical. The wars that we've been engaged in are manifestations of American hubris, supported by a kind of false patriotism. Honor our troops. That's what happens at football games, which are the national religion in the United States. We have a problem. Our system is broken. Our political system is broken. Our elections have been corrupted largely by the Supreme Court's idiotic decision in People United, and the fact that there's no limit to how much money can be deployed by malefactors of great wealth, to quote FDR. There's an interesting Chinese theory that I'm not entirely convinced by, but I can't dismiss. And that is that Chinese history, of course, is one of many dynasties. The country keeps dividing and coming back together under new management. And a dynasty is essentially a constitutional order. And the Chinese experience suggests that dynasties last about 225, 250 years. And then they're so embarnacled by regulations, so corrupt, so effete, so fixated on extraneous issues, that one of three things happens. There's a revolt, and a revolution occurs, and the regime is overthrown, and a new constitutional order is established. Second, there's a foreign invasion. And for 600 of the last 1,000 years, China was in fact ruled by foreigners after these dynastic cycles played out. Or finally, in rare occasions, the dynasty pulls itself together and resurrects itself and has a silver age to follow the golden age of its initial period. We're at 250 years, and our constitutional order is rapidly decaying. And I think we are in a pre-revolutionary situation in this country. I don't think people on the left or people on the right are at all satisfied with the political elites, with the system as it runs. They do not believe that their views are taken seriously. Hillary Clinton described them as deplorables. Mitt Romney, on the other side, said that they were 47% idiots and apathetic, and basically bought off. I don't think those charges are correct, but they express an attitude which I don't find it at all surprising that ordinary Americans would find deeply offensive and inconsistent with our civic virtues as they have existed for the last 250 years. It's entirely possible there will be civil strife. We now have the army going into cities. I would remind you that the purpose of the Second Amendment, which says a well-regulated militia being essential to the security of a free state, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed, was set up because the states feared the imposition of a dictatorship by the federal government. The Second Amendment is there, and we have a heavily armed populace, and they are not happy with what either the Democrats or the Republicans are doing when they're in office. We are very divided now. We are polarized, that's the usual term. We don't even talk to each other. Families break up over political differences. We can't have a civil discussion of public policy issues. This is setting us up for something, I don't know what it will be, but I don't look forward to it. War should be a last resort of policy. The first resort should be an effort to compose differences, and that requires dialogue. And if you refuse to meet and engage in dialogue, you not only do not gain time, but you increase the odds that force will be used. And when force is used, its outcome is never certain. It is always more expensive in blood and treasure than you had calculated. If you don't ask yourself before you start a war, how will I end this war? With whom? And why should they agree to the terms I plan to set? Then the war will go on forever, and the blood and the treasure will continue to be expended at rates that you can't sustain. In some ways, that's where the United States is now. There is a long tradition in Asia of live and let live. The Chinese Empire was certainly primus inter pares, first among the rest, but it did not invade other countries for the most part. It did not manipulate their politics. They sought its approval because there were benefits to them in doing that. But it was not either India or Europe, both promontories off the Eurasian landmass, which were divided into savagely fighting, scheming, and unscrupulous polities. Asia has a tradition of trying to compose differences with dialogue. We could learn something from that. Well, I think in Chinese diplomacy, which is really very professional now, there is a classic phrase, 求同存异. Let us seek common ground while reserving those differences we can't now resolve. Sun Tzu, the great Chinese strategic thinker, said that no country ever profited from a war. And I think he was right. You can win wars, and you can conquer territory, and you can subdue people, but it's very rare that that happens. Usually, if you occupy someone, you get what we now call terrorism as a response. There is a 100% coincidence between foreign occupation and suicide bombing, for example. Israel, I remember speaking with, I don't want to name him, but a former Israeli prime minister, and a very wise man, not a particularly nice man, but a wise man, when he said to me, you know, Israelis must remember the history of the Arabs in Spain. The Arabs invaded Spain about 750 or so, and they were there for 800 years. They never made an effort to make peace with the quarrelsome little Christian kingdoms on their borders. They fought them. And an 800-year war ended in 1492 with the expulsion of all the Muslims and Jews from Spain. And my interlocutor, this Israeli official, said, The lesson is make peace when you're strong. Don't think anything lasts forever. Make peace when you're strong, or you will be destroyed when you are weak. No, I think actually they've weakened themselves enormously in this war. They've destroyed the illusion that Zionism and Judaism are one and the same. They're not. So, I mean, there's nothing cruel and racist about Judaism. It may be tribalist in some respects, but Jews in the West have been in the forefront of liberal movements to protect human rights, to combat racism, to combat prejudice, to enforce tolerance, and so forth. Israel is the exact opposite. It is all about racism, dehumanization of others, and genocide.